All right, welcome back to Instagram Live. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum with Barbell Medicine.
Drew Singh says, I lose brain cells when you don't post vlogs. I lose brain cells when I don't post vlogs.
Is doing leg extension machine bad for your knees? Nope. Welcome back to Instagram Live or YouTube if you're watching this in the future. I'm Dr. Jordan Feigenbaum of Barbell Medicine. It is Monday, November 18th. We're doing Instagram Live. I'm trying to get in the habit of doing these more often and then subsequently posting them on YouTube if there's good stuff there. So as you know, Black Friday is coming. We've got some Black Friday deals that you guys and gals are going to like. So be on the lookout for information about that. If you're subscribed to our newsletter, you're going to get first dibs on that. If you're not subscribed to our newsletter, you should do that because we have a spicy new newsletter going out. Believe it's scheduled to send tomorrow. Also have some new content coming up with Alan Flanagan on our podcast, and then a long-form article that I wrote about the science of red meat intake. But what we're doing here is a Q&A, question and answer. So you submit questions, ideally. I'll try to answer them to the best of my ability, and we'll just have a conversation. All right, we're going to try to find some questions so that I can provide some answers. Oh, last announcement, if you're really hankering for some new Barbell Medicine gear, we've got the baseball tees are in stock, the competition tees are in stock, and our singlets are on pre-order right now. SBD and Barbell Medicine partnering up together to bring you some sweet Barbell Medicine singlets, which are indeed IPF and USAPL legal because, every year I pay to make sure that our logo is approved. So check those things out over on the website. All right, back to the questions. Let's go. Sup, dude? How's training going? This probably is the last week of this developmental block. It was about 4 weeks, which is a normal amount of time for me. So developmental block is effectively really trying to develop strength, and then ideally you either transfer it to a more specific block afterwards to be able to display very specific strength performances for a powerlifter to be squat, bench, deadlift. Or you enter in another developmental block. You can do either one. It's just, broad strokes kind of thing. So training is going reasonably well. It's time for me to do a pivot and then go back to another developmental block because I need to pick another meet so that I can actually compete again. So the plan is to go up a weight class, the 105s, and compete at USAPL Raw Nationals next year. It was a really cool experience going to USAPL Raw Nationals this year in Lombard, Illinois. If you haven't checked our vlog yet, do that. Had a blast. Level of competition was amazing. The venue was really, really decked out. SBD and Rogue and USAPL and the people they worked with to put on the whole deal, they all did great, and the atmosphere was great. So I'd like to be a part of it next year. And so we'll see. That's the big plan. I don't know if that's the first time I ever talked about that, but that's what's going on. Training's going well. I think, again, this today and this week actually is going to be the last week of this developmental block, and then we'll see what the future holds for the next training block. Jordan, I got cycling shoes, and I've kept my Rogue Echo bike the same height and have knee pain. They're clip-ins. What should I do? So I think what you're asking me is that since you've switched to clip-in pedals on your Rogue Echo bike, you have knee pain. I don't necessarily know that they're related. I'd be more curious about what the rest of your training looks like, and then how much volume or which would be duration, and also what the intensity is of your cycling. So the first question would be, is there any cycling that you can do on the Rogue Echo bike or on a regular bicycle that doesn't hurt? If so, what are the characteristics that are different between that and when you do have pain? Then I'd be looking at your total training load and the context of the environmental stress. And this all is in the context rather of you actually having very significant knee pain. I mean, if it's, a 3 on a scale of 1 to 10, I don't know that I care. And then, final thing just off the cuff, without knowing anything more about you, would be when was the last time you were able to do that activity without knee pain, and then kind of what's changed since then. So most of the time, knee pain with respect to cycling is generally due to, and actually with resistance training is usually a load management problem. And I don't mean load when I say load, I don't mean weight. That's part of the external load. External load would be objective metrics, things like load, range of motion, velocity, total volume, etc. What I mean is internal load. So internal load is the load that's actually placed upon the lifter or the individual, which is the external load that's filtered through the individual characteristics of the person. So their previous training, their preparedness to train, their motivation to train, their expectations about what the training is going to feel like and what it's going to do to them. Environmental stress, which is not just like, humidity, temperature, wind, whatever, but like what's going on in your life, all these things, your genetics. It sort of filters the external load to determine the internal load, which is ultimately what gets transmitted into either fatigue or fitness adaptations. And so if you're having a bunch of pain that's cropped up out of nowhere, I think the road that I'd go down is load management and see kind of what do we need to do to get you back in the game. And then as far as practically how to do that, usually backing off external load, which in this case would be intensity, volume, and things of that nature, in addition to education would be kind of the first steps there. So, long answer, but hopefully useful, right? Any negatives to only squatting with a belt? If you wanted to get better at squatting without a belt, you might want to practice that as a specific skill, although you will still improve your squatting strength without a belt when you train only with a belt. I just view it as a training tool, right? Some people say, oh, it's a crutch. It's like, I don't know. There's a lot of mental things that we do, mental strategies we do to kind of decrease our fear about a particular movement or a particular set at a particular weight. Using a belt is one of them. The data right now suggests that using a belt increases bar velocity and improves the efficiency, basically keeping the bar path a little straighter. So as far as can you be a very strong individual and never use a belt? Sure. You'll just likely lift less weight than if you used a belt and got good at using the belt. On the other hand, if you're never going to compete, I don't know that it matters. But yeah, as far as what does a belt do upstairs, I think that's a deeper story, a more complex story. And I think overall, for somebody who's really interested in lifting weights, getting strong, etc., I think using a belt on your most important exercises, on the heaviest sets, and getting good at that seems to be a good idea. I would also help control the external load by doing some sets beltless, particularly on less important exercises. That's kind of how I manage it. On the other hand, you could use the belt for all of those exercises too and live a full and complete life. The idea that you're going to get less abdominal muscle recruitment has been debunked. You'll actually get more. What happens is you're able to contract the muscles a little harder, and they're also being pressed against the belt as they are contracting. So the intramuscular pressure increases, which increases motor unit recruitment. So you tend to actually recruit a little bit more muscle mass. The extent to which that imparts a more significant training effect, I don't know. And I don't think anybody else knows either, meaning that we don't have like hypertrophy study outcomes, as far as I'm aware of, or other strength outcomes where they're actually testing abdominal strength in a reliable manner. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Doc, do you ever use heart rate HRR percentage when prescribing cardiovascular? Wow, I just had like a pure language stroke. Doc, do you ever use heart rate? I don't know what HRR percentage is. You're talking about heart rate reserve or just heart rate percentage, like heart rate percentage of a particular of your max to prescribe cardiovascular exercise? No, I don't. I just feel like it doesn't encapsulate enough of the individual's internal load. So one way to actually measure the physiological response to exercise, the actual internal load, is by measuring heart rate. You can do that. That being said, I don't think that that's an as accurate of a predictor as RPE. So I prefer using RPE for not only resistance training but also for cardiorespiratory training as well. So you can do reps in reserve also for resistance training. That kind of works, but RPE is, I think, a better way to measure the internal load that somebody's actually experiencing. Yep. Thoughts on a recent podcast about doctors and stating that only men 50 to 59 with history of MI benefit from statins. I mean, that's demonstrably not true on literally every level. So, for instance, young individuals with a history of familial hypercholesterolemia benefit, and this is as young as people, I think is in the adolescent years. Literally, a study just came out showing substantial benefit to those individuals on statins. Familial hypercholesterolemia, you effectively produce way too much atherogenic lipoprotein, which carries around cholesterol or a lipid and a protein. There's cholesterol molecules in there. In any event, statins been shown to improve mortality, basically reduces the risk of early mortality and also the burden of disease. Also, that's again from teenagers with that all the way up to to people in their 20s and 30s who have risk factors for atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease. Again, that's for primary prevention, so preventing the first atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease event, which includes MI, a heart attack, a stroke, TIA, peripheral artery disease, acute coronary syndrome, all of these things. So for primary prevention and for secondary prevention, people who already have been diagnosed with atherosclerotic cardiovascular disease, statins can be useful. So, I mean, whoever said that is just not qualified to speak on those things, and I probably wouldn't listen to them on something that they're clearly not an expert in. And this stuff is covered pretty well in the new article that's going to go up hopefully either tomorrow or Wednesday, titled The Science of Red Meat Intake. Any advice on residency interviews? I thought residency interviews were a lot lower key than med school interviews. Med school interviews, everybody's just trying to get in, right? Residency interviews, it seems like people are just trying to figure out if they like you and if they want to work with you for the next, 3 to however many years. It's weird, in every residency and medical school interview that I ever did, they always asked me how much I bench pressed. So maybe your experience will be different than mine. But yeah, I think you should know a little bit about the program that you're going to go interview at. So, what their specialties are or interests are, if there are any. And then you should, if you have any questions about like the schedule. So for instance, if you're like doing a family medicine, you might ask how many ICU rotations do you have? When do the second years get to act as senior residents when they're on wards, something like that. Just stuff that actually matters. On the other hand, it's hard to really know if you're going to be in a good residency program or a bad residency program just from your interviews. You can talk to other residents and see if you can suss out good and bad, but yeah, most people aren't going to tell you that their residency program is bad. It's a lot of cognitive dissonance there. So I would just try to, kind of get a feel for the working environments that you'll be in, which you get to tour, and then also just what the residents are like, because you're going to have to work with them most of the time. Yeah. Thoughts on ass to grass heavy squats? They're a perfectly valid way to squat if you want to get better at those type of squats. On the other hand, if you just want to go down to below parallel, that's fine too. Depth is kind of this arbitrary level if you're not going to compete. So it exists upon a spectrum of you want to do loaded hip and knee flexion, ground-based loaded hip and knee flexion through some range of motion that you can keep consistent. And should you go an inch below parallel or right at parallel? What are the big training differences that you see there? Well, the strength that you gain is going to be specific to the range of motion you train in, and you can make a case for going to parallel or slightly below parallel from a muscle training economy standpoint, because you're going to get more adductor, more glute once you go just below parallel. But if you go even deeper than that, you don't really get any more motor unit recruitment or muscle mass being trained. You just are training the same amount of muscles through a different range of motion so that you get stronger at different muscle lengths. So what's the best? I think it depends on your goals. And if you're not a competitive lifter, I don't know that it matters. Yeah. All right. If a lifter likes using ammonia or other external things for hype at a meet, how would you recommend using them in training? I probably wouldn't. Yeah. If you know that you like them already, that's cool. Just you use them at a meet. I think in training, most 99% of your sessions are just putting in work, developing strength. If the performance on a particular strength workout or lift for a particular day is more important than the training effect, which, maybe you're a week out from a meet, maybe that's the case, but it's not typical. Then sure, use all the hype, use all the ammonia, but I think just save it for the meet. Yeah. People don't need to overthink this. Hey, Jordan, if I'm around 20 to 24% body fat, can I gain strength from linear periodization on a cut? Sure. Yeah. The strength response and weight gain or loss are not that tightly correlated. Obviously, the extent that you're going to compromise lean body mass accrual via a cut or losing weight, sure, that might compromise your total strength improvement in the short term. But in the long term, you're benefiting your health because 20 to 24% body fat is, fairly high. I would wager that your waist circumference is in excess of where it should be, and you're probably carrying too much adipose tissue, which is deleterious to health outcomes. So what I would do, is most of the time tell people to get their weight and their waist circumference down to within spec. And then if they want to gain more lean body mass, go for it, particularly if getting strong and the low rep range is very important to them, then sure, increasing lean body mass is going to be a part of the process. But I would not sacrifice one's health in the short term just to get stronger in the short term in some arbitrary rep range. And basically, it is very problematic to be carrying too much body weight in both the short and the long term. And evidence suggests that when people gain weight, particularly they gain excess adipose tissue, they have a hell of a time losing it. If you could just easily lose the weight later, if that was an easy thing to do for people to not only lose the weight, but then keep it off, the obesity epidemic would be, much smaller problem than it actually is. So most people, when they gain adipose tissue, are unable to lose it or unable to keep it off. That's, the actual facts of this. This YouTube vlog or Instagram live brought to you by Topo Chico. I wish that, look, if you work for Topo Chico, call me up, sponsor me. I literally held the bottle here. The logo probably wasn't facing the camera, so maybe I'm an amateur here, but it is good stuff. I like this water. I like it because it hurts. When I drink it, it hurts a little bit. I want that. You mentioned before that you were doing a paper on CBD oil. Yes, I did. What were the highlights of your findings? That there's very, very little data suggesting that it works in humans outside of these very rare congenital seizure disorders, period. The data that we do have on it, particularly well-controlled, well-designed trials, suggests that it's not very helpful with respect to the things it's often touted to improve. Things like pain, things like anxiety, things like depression, things like sleep disorders or insomnia, things like appetite, nausea, etc. And so a lot of these things, there's just not data on it. And the data that does exist is either not done in humans or is just this sort of theoretical link between some physiological concept and, an active ingredient in CBD. But the stuff we do have data on, like actual data, it's just not good. And then that's just from assuming you're getting pharmaceutical CBD, cannabidiol, which you're certainly not unless you have, again, one of these two very rare seizure disorders, or you're using medical marijuana, in which case you're getting more than just CBD. But that's, again, another discussion. So I just can't recommend it right now. And I think if more data emerges suggesting that it's very, very useful, then the next problem that I have with this is that the CBD that you're getting over the counter is unregulated, meaning that there's nobody making CBD or products with certificate of good manufacturing process that's informed for sport, like safe, etc. And then contaminations, the studies on the contaminants found in CBD products are, I mean, they're overwhelming. Their toxicology papers are just, I mean, the stuff that people are getting in there, oh man, it's scary. It's scary. And the different dosing and just, yeah. So I think early adopters are probably missing the mark right now, and probably there's some nefarious activity with why they're recommending this so hard. The "it works for me" fallacy is hard to deal with people who are not scientists. But look, I'm not concerned if it worked for you or a friend, particularly if that friend is getting paid by the company who makes the CBD oil. That's not a valid scientific study. You have all sorts of biases going into the "it works for me" fallacy, and yeah, I'm unconcerned with your with an uncontrolled observation. And so when we actually put it to the test, when we look at the existing data, yeah, CBD, I can't recommend it. I recommend against it right now, outside again the rare congenital seizure disorders. So wanted to say thanks for the great content. Recently did my first powerlifting meet using 12-week strength program. Total 1320, PRN squat 501, deadlift 539. Went 6 for 9 and placed second in the 93 kilo class. Ben, dude, that's sick. It reminds me of my first meet. My first meet, 2011. I weighed in 176 pounds. It was in a gym. No, you're like, yeah, no shit, dude. No, it was in a commercial or a school gym rather, like, with all the basketball backboards pulled up out of the way. Yeah. What did I do? So I went at 176. I squatted 200 kilos, 440. I benched 303 and a half, which is 137 and a half kilos. I only got my opening bench. I don't know. I don't know why I even try to cut weight either. Like that, I thought that the weight cut kind of hurt me, but I remember they're using this stupid Ivanko barbell. The Ivanko barbell's got a very narrow, like smooth part before the knurling starts. So a standard knurling, I think, is 16 or 16 and a half inches, like knurl to knurl. And then the Ivanko bar is like 14 inches. And then it's got 3 power rings, 3 score marks in the thing. None of them are standardized. And you're like, where do I grip this thing? I couldn't figure it out. So between that and the weight cut, I don't know, not a great performance. But I did bench 303 and a half my first meet, 176, and then I pulled 540. So I think we might have totaled the same. I don't know offhand. Yeah, nice job, man. Hey man, glad I could steal you from Max for a picture at Nationals. I think you would have been a great asset to the cupping station. If you guys are new to following me and you missed my birthday celebration, this was also like a going away party. My friends threw me in Santa Cruz before I moved down here. They threw me. It was like a placebo party. There was like a cupping station. There was like reflexology posters all over the place. There was CBD oil, collagen protein. I mean, they were just really trolled me hard, which means that we're good friends. So yeah, I'm glad that I missed the cupping station at Raw Nationals. Form is great on the deadlift, but somehow still managed to tweak my back. Any thoughts on how I'm getting injured? Yeah. So just earlier in this well, it's not a podcast, it's a live Q&A thing. We talked about load management, and again, that's not just external load, which would be weight, reps, sets, velocity, like range of motion, velocity, etc. This is internal load. So how you experience all of those things. So yeah, I think load management is problematic there. I would not associate form, quote unquote, on deadlifts with back tweaks to begin with. And I'm writing an article on this. This is going to be my next 20 pager. So here's the thing. Neutral spine is actually pretty large range of motion. It's between, a couple degrees shy of full flexion and a couple degrees shy of full extension. That requires more explanation, but there's not just one, oh, that's neutral spine. There's a lot of, relatively large amount of movement there compared to just this, that one position that's quote unquote neutral. Sure, you have cadaver studies where people rip the spines out of cadavers and they flex them a bunch of times and the discs herniated. Okay, but you cannot squat deadlift, kettlebell swing, literally any sort of movement that involves hip extension or hip flexion to hip extension without flexing the spine. You get a lot of flexion in a kettlebell swing, for example, or a golf swing, for example. And you don't see this increase in disc herniations in sports where there's a lot of hip spinal flexion either. Like golf. In fact, they have lower than average amount of disc herniations. But that's not even the point, because disc herniations aren't even related to low back pain outside of like 2 to 5% of cases. So, next question is like, well, why would you even want to have a quote unquote neutral spine or a flat back in a deadlift? Why? It appears to be a little bit more efficient for most lifting mechanics. There's obviously some people who tend to have a performance advantage by when they round their or flex their lumbar spine. But in most performance tasks where this actually has been tested, a neutral spine tends to do better than a flexed spine, even though it doesn't actually connote any increased injury risk. So the biggest problem is that you have hardline coaches. Now, hardline's not a company. I mean, I'm sure it is, but what I mean by hardline is people who saying it's black and white, good form, bad form. It's like, okay, one, define those things, and two, show evidence to support like this arbitrary line in the sand. When people do this hardline thing, like rounding your back in the deadlift or the squat is bad and you'll get injured, they're noceboing you. They're hurting you potentially, because now you have this stupid model in your brain like, oh, if I do this, I'm going to hurt myself. And it's like, okay, by what mechanism? So anyway, if you have low back pain, I think it's a load management thing. It's probably going to resolve on its own. And so I would just be looking at your programming. That's what I would address first. Yeah. When calories and protein are controlled, does glycemic index matter? For what? If it's all getting turned to sugar by your body anyways, refined carbohydrate any worse for you than more complex carbs? Again, it's for what? If you're talking about for weight loss or preventing weight regain, if you're talking about for LDL cholesterol, if you're talking about for insulin sensitivity, potentially diabetes outcomes like a hemoglobin A1C, yeah, it matters, because you're talking about a total fiber intake. So best outcomes are for fiber intakes between 25 to 29 grams per day on a minimum. And once you're achieving that, your total calories are correct. You're going to be pretty good. Yeah. Let's see. Could you expand on the statement you guys have made in the past in regards to most people actually being undertrained? Yeah, most people, in fact, are undertrained. So from a population level, for just looking at the United States, about 40% of individuals meet the current aerobic guidelines set forth in the 2018 physical activity guidelines for Americans. Okay, but you can look that up. It's free. All right. And only about 20% of those who are of the 40% are meeting the resistance training guidelines, which is to resistance train twice per week. So by definition, plenty of people are undertrained, because most of them aren't even training. And in addition, the ones who are probably undertrained as well. So, and if you just restrict this thing to powerlifting, I think particularly in the United States, there's just this pervasive sort of conventional wisdom that, you don't want to do too much because you need to recover. And certainly recovery is important. I'm not denying that. But I think you have two potential models in your brain for why you're not getting better. So one is that I'm just not recovering enough. And so the way you would manage that is to train less so that you could recover more. The other thing is I'm not doing enough to get better, that's the view that I have. So not only do you have to do more, but then the time between when you're actually applying the training stress, right, and generating the training fatigue to the actual fitness adaptation, the time to realize that is probably going to stretch out too. Although I would argue that you don't need to necessarily dissipate fatigue to have a fitness adaptation. What you really need to do is have the amount of fitness adaptations that you're developing, that you're generating, the positive aspects outweigh the negative aspects from training-induced fatigue. So you all know that you can perform or have performed very well at a high level while you still have a bunch of training fatigue on board, or life fatigue, right? It's like training when you're hungover, training when you're tired, you accidentally PR. Oops, how did that happen? If you didn't dissipate all this fatigue. On the other hand, you know that you've trained like crap, performed like crap when you've dissipated a bunch of fatigue. You went on vacation for a week, you didn't train at all. You came back, missed your top set. It's just a little more nuanced than that. So most people, by definition, just are not training. Just 80% of the United States population is not doing resistance training at all. The 20% who are engaging in that, I would wager most of them are undertrained. And yeah, most people are undertrained. Let's see. Are those hats for sale? These hats, the dad hats, they're going to be for sale pretty soon. So make sure you get those. I think we made a substantial amount of them because I didn't want to run out for the Christmas/Hanukkah season. So you're welcome. I like when people ask me, like, what is your opinion on this person? Like, who am I to judge the character of somebody else? If you want to ask me a particular thing that they said that you have a question about, I'm cool with that. I probably won't name them because I don't want to, start any internet beefs. I've done that for too long. But if you ask me like thoughts on person, I don't know that I think about other people like that, particularly in the fitness industry, that much. Just as a person, I think about some things they've said, some egregious claims they've maybe made, but I don't think about them like, I wonder if they're a good person. I wonder who they vote for. I wonder, like, do they donate to charity? I just don't. Let's see. Have run several strength-focused templates in a row. 12-week strength, powerlifting 2. Looking to focus on losing weight for the next several months. Should I do power building 2 or hypertrophy 2? If it were me, I'd probably do hypertrophy 2. Power building 2, you could actually go back and forth on them. Power building 2's just got more of a specificity towards the big 3, squat, bench, deadlift. If you don't necessarily, so if you really enjoy those lifts, they would kind of make your training world go round, I would do power building 2. But if you would like a break, and you want to gauge in some more conditioning stuff, I think hypertrophy 2 is probably a better choice. You can go back and forth so you don't like lose your zeal for doing the big 3 if that's important to you. And so, yeah, we do sell training templates. It's kind of our entry level sort of barbell medicine programming. If you're interested in our programming ideas and like how that would like actually manifest out into a program, we got a bunch of different templates that are suited for people at various different points of training with various different goals. You should check those out, the barbellmedicine.com website. If the goal is to increase muscle size, should we strive to get stronger? Yeah, so I know that you asked me this about 2 weeks ago, and I answered you there. I think if you want to get larger muscles, then one thing objectively that you'll be looking at is, are my lifts and the rep ranges that I'm training them going up? In general, that would be a good sign that you're actually gaining lean body mass in addition to actual measurements. That being said, there are a lot of different ways to generate the stimulus to drive muscle growth that don't involve necessarily a lot of heavy resistance training in the low repetition range. So, yeah. How best to reprogram my squat after a 9-month herniated disc that caused bad sciatica in the left leg? Left leg is weak and not firing the way I want it to. Yeah, I wouldn't do anything differently about approaching your squat training than somebody else who is new to the squat and hasn't been or who hasn't been training it for a while. So I think being cautious initially with the training load and training volume. And I would train in multiple different rep ranges. And I think if you want to do squat variations, since you have a little more experience, you could start that from the beginning. So you might have one day of back squats, one day of pause squats, and another day of leg press. You could also make the leg press unilateral, one leg at a time. So you can actually, if you want to focus on unilateral strength, I think that's a totally reasonable thing. I like split squats and step ups and stuff like that as well. But I think a leg press can be useful here too. Does micronized creatine monohydrate have any benefits when compared to just creatine monohydrate? No. And I did a creatine video on the YouTubes, which I would recommend you guys watch if you haven't seen it already. Hey doc, I'm starting to create content for my client athletes and circle of influence and would like to bring awareness to you and your content via occasional referencing. Would you be okay with that? I would be flattered. See, one of the best things that you guys can do, guys and gals, sorry, it's 2019, I'm trying to be inclusive. One of the best things that you guys can do is to share this stuff with your friends and family. And, I don't mean in like an annoying evangelistic kind of way, but there are only so many of us involved in barbell medicine, right? And so we're trying to get the word out. We're trying to help as many people as possible, but we can't do it without you. And so I would love if you guys would share, this video or this Q&A or some of our posts or whatever you feel like is, within your purview and something that you would normally do. Share it with your friends, family, people you go to the gym with, whatever. What is your opinion on the fact that Louis Simmons has people do more box squatting than regular squatting? Would you ever do this yourself? I mean, maybe if somebody preferred box squatting and they weren't a competitive powerlifter, sure. But I don't necessarily concern myself with what Louis does. And I don't mean that in an arrogant way. He doesn't concern himself with what I do, and I don't concern himself with what he does, because I think that when he talks about powerlifting, he's talking about a different sport than I am. It's, gear in a particular federation with particular standards that are different than the powerlifting that I've competed in. So, that being said, I'm not married to a regular squat that doesn't involve a box for people who aren't competing. Yeah. How do you approach exercise selection when creating general strength programs? Yeah, so I would refer you to the beginner prescription, or which is the free version of our beginner template. The beginner template also comes with like a 70-page ebook that really details how we came up with that program, which includes a section on exercise selection. So there's no such thing as general strength. All strength is specific. It's specific to the rep range you train it in. It's specific to the range of motion, the velocity, the contraction types, all sorts of things. The degree that one exercise improves performance in another exercise is called transference, or carryover. And the more closely related two exercises are via those, again, the range of motion, the contraction type, velocity, etc., the more closely that the more likely they're going to carry over to each other. So for a general trainee, the person who's not going to go compete in a barbell sport, instead of specializing on a few exercises, I would like to have a broader base of physical development that I would build for them until they wanted to specialize, if they did. So I would not just use one type of squat variation or even really mandate that they squat. I really just want loaded hip and knee movement, right? So the same thing with a deadlift. I wouldn't necessarily make sure that they do a conventional deadlift or a sumo deadlift. They could do a trap bar deadlift, so I have way less restriction. And then finally, we know that from a motor learning standpoint, when you're trying to actually learn how to move your body, for instance, in space, and develop all these motor programs, particularly when it comes to non-standard or movements that are different each time, that you would want a wider variety of movements. People learn faster that way, and people have more robust development of these motor programs. So wouldn't hyper specialize just from a sort of training development standpoint. We want more proficiency in more movements rather than proficiency in less movements. And then I also think people learn better that way. So hopefully that makes sense. But if you want a further explanation, we talk about this extensively in both the free barbell prescription, which is our free version of the beginner template, and then also the paid version, which we go into this in a lot more depth. Yep. Let's see. Why is my general practitioner telling me that I don't need more than 50 to 70 grams of protein, even though I told him I train? Well, a few questions. One, why did you ask him? Because it's unlikely that this person is up to date on the current information. So right now, the current RDA guideline suggests 0.8 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. The current Aspen, European or American Society for Nutrition recommends that most individuals get between 1.2 and 2.0 grams per kilos, and it becomes more and more important as people age because they become more and more anabolically resistant, and this is one of the primary prevention tools against sarcopenia and other age-related weakness and muscle loss. So the final part of this is if you look at actual guidelines from the International Society on Sports Nutrition or International Athletic Association, I forget the last part of their acronym, or if you look at the NSCA or the ACSM, the recommendations are that individuals should consume anywhere between 1.6 to 2.5, all the way up to 3.1 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. And as far as where you fit in the range, depends on if you're losing weight, gaining weight, maintaining weight, and your needs. So the recommendation that's actually based on very good evidence that I would give to you is to consume 1.6 to about 2.5 grams of protein per kilo body weight per day. If you're gaining weight, 1.6 grams per kilo body weight per day is fine. If you're losing weight, I'd ratchet that up. Yeah. And we discussed this at length in one of our previous newsletter articles, actually. So if you haven't signed up for a newsletter, you get stuff like this in your inbox every month. Yeah. What can I replace milk and whey with? I like milk because of the amount of protein, but it hurts my stomach. Yeah, so you could try a lactose-free version of milk if you like that. You could also try a lactase pill to see if that's, if you just don't tolerate dairy, if that's the thing. And I would expect you to still be able to tolerate whey with water. So you try that. If you can't tolerate the whey with water, one thing that people commonly have reactions to is a whey protein concentrate with the beta lactalbumin. You might try to do a whey protein isolate. My recommendation would be try the whey with water first. If that doesn't work for you, try to find a whey protein isolate, buy a pound of it, see if that works with water. And then you don't need to take a protein supplement though, really, if you're getting your dietary protein in from other sources. So any sort of, any protein source really, if you like eggs, if you like chicken, fish, lean meats, if you like yogurt, Greek yogurt, dairy works well if you can tolerate it, but sounds like that's not an option for you. But there are plenty of options out there. Another non-training question. What is your method with getting your beard line while trimming your neck? Digging the thicker beard, man. Beard questions. So, yeah, on the neck, I just use, I have an Andis tea trimmer. That's just what I use to line up down here. And then I use a safety razor to shave. That's it. Yeah, no real special technique. Yeah. Are those blue light glasses? No, these are real glasses because I am losing my eyesight. Do you think isolation exercises are more beneficial than compound lifts for hypertrophy? I'm thinking that isometric is simply a requirement of volume plus frequency behind a certain point of exposure to training. I don't necessarily think so when you look at primary movers. So for instance, like quadriceps in the squat, for example, I don't necessarily know that isolation movements are any better than them. I do think that when training resources dwindle, that one way to get in additional training volume, additional training stress, particularly to drive more hypertrophy, you can do isolation exercises, but secondary movers probably respond a little bit better to isolation exercises. Also, you can take isolation exercises to failure or closer to failure, but are also to failure with a little bit less detrimental effects. And then training or trying to achieve muscular hypertrophy, the maximum improvement that you can via just compound lifts is probably not going to work for most folks. Because you're going to need to do more training volume, more frequency, and then ultimately fatigue becomes a problem that you need to deal with. And isolation exercises are one way to do that. But as far as one better than the other for primary movers, probably not. Secondary movers, you make a better case for that, but you could also find ways to train around them. But in the grand scheme of things, a hypertrophy program would have both, probably. Let's see. Viability of a vegan diet for a strength athlete. Yeah, so this is the last question we'll answer tonight. Yeah, I think that if you want to be a vegan or vegetarian, as long as you're getting in the correct amount of calories and total daily protein, you're going to be fine. In fact, the research from multiple different studies showing that as long as you're getting the correct dose of protein, that the training outcomes are either no different or very, very similar, so much so that any difference that's statistically significant is probably not clinically significant because of the inter-individual variation in training response. So if someone wants to be vegan, if someone wants to be a vegetarian, cool. We also make a nice pea protein isolate called Vegan RX. It's got the same essential amino acid content as our whey protein, which is good. So if you have a vegan friend, vegetarian friend, and they need a protein supplement, there you go. Okay, thank you guys so much for tuning in. I'm about to get kicked off here because I've been here for like an hour. Again, sign up for our newsletter. It's coming out. We're going to give you guys first access to the Black Friday deals. Also, we got a bunch of great information that goes out every month. So if you're not signed up for that, do that. Barbell Medicine Apparel. We've got new merch over there. We've got a baseball tee. We've got competition tees. Pre-order for the SBD singlets coming out. And then, yeah, I hope everybody is having a great Monday. Thank you so much for tuning in. See you guys later.